This is a story about a mind, brilliant on paper and deadly in practice. A man who lived alone in a remote wooden cabin surrounded by forests, snow, and silence. A man who typed a 35,000-word essay carefully crafted to challenge the world's reliance on technology. A man who mailed handcrafted explosives, each one designed with precision, patience, and purpose-shattering lives, terrifying communities, and eluding the most powerful law enforcement in the country. This is the story of Theodore John Kaczynski, genius, recluse, and killer. A man whose intellect became his weapon, whose isolation became his shield, and whose ideas continue to haunt the intersection of freedom, technology, and human choice. In a clearing deep in the wilderness near Lincoln, Montana, stands a small, rustic cabin, isolated, quiet, and unassuming from the outside. Yet, within its walls, a storm of human intellect and menace takes shape. No electricity, no plumbing, only the essentials. A wood stove, a simple cot, and rows of books lining the walls, stacked floor to ceiling, a library of knowledge and obsession. Inside, every inch of space is meticulously organized. Tools for shaping metal and wood are carefully arranged. Jars of chemicals sit in neat rows. Disguises, wigs, sunglasses, shoes with fake soles are laid out with precision, each intended for stealthy deliveries and to avoid leaving a trace. And then there are the dozens of carefully made wooden boxes, each one a potential weapon, each one crafted with the care of an artisan but the intent of a killer. These boxes will carry explosives designed to wound, maim, and sometimes kill. It is here, in this cramped, almost claustrophobic space, that ideas are transformed into action. Plans are drafted on scraps of paper, calculations are checked repeatedly, components are assembled with near religious focus, and amid all this, a manifesto, a document intended to explain, justify, and rationalize violence, is written, line by line, page by page, in the same room where bombs are constructed. The cabin is both a workshop and a laboratory, a sanctuary and a chamber of terror, where isolation fuels invention, intellect turns to destruction, and a man shapes both his thoughts and the fate of strangers across the nation. Theodore Kaczynski was born May 22, 1942, in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, into a working-class Polish-American family. From an early age, it was clear he was no ordinary child. His intellect was extraordinary, an IQ in the high 160, and his mind absorbed numbers, theories, and patterns with ease. By the time he reached his teens, he had skipped grades and was already far ahead of his peers academically. At age 16, he entered Harvard University, one of the nation's most elite institutions, as one of the youngest students in the country, but brilliance did not shield him from struggle. At Harvard, Ted found himself in a world of affluence and privileged peers from backgrounds far different from his own. He was young, socially awkward, and acutely aware of his differences. Mocked for his clothing, his modest upbringing, and his quiet demeanor, he began to withdraw further from others. Social life became nearly impossible. He spent most of his days in solitude, reading, thinking, observing. During this time, Ted became involved in a psychology experiment run by Henry A. Murray, a professor renowned for studying human behavior and personality. The study, later described by some as abusive, subjected Ted and other students to intense psychological stress, personal critiques, and challenges designed to break down the psyche. The experience left a mark. It is impossible to measure up its full effect, but the isolation, humiliation, and relentless pressure contributed to a growing resentment, a seed of distrust, anger, and detachment from society that would, decades later, emerge in violent and deadly ways. These formative years at Harvard would shape not only his intellect, but also his worldview, a worldview that questioned authority, technology, and the very fabric of modern life. From the late 1970s into the mid-1990s, a wave of terror quietly spread across the United States. Mailboxes at universities, the offices of scientists, and even airline employees became targets. Packages arrived without warning, carefully wrapped, unassuming in appearance, yet deadly in intent. The FBI quickly recognized a pattern and labeled the case Unabomber, the Unabomber, a single elusive perpetrator whose motives remained a mystery. The early devices were smaller and relatively crude, yet even these first bombs caused injury and alarm. As years passed, the complexity increased. Each device demonstrated meticulous planning, precision craftsmanship, and a deep understanding of explosives. Components were selected not only for their effectiveness, but for their ability to leave no trace, no fingerprints, no DNA, no identifiable mark of the maker. Every bomb one was a puzzle, each one more sophisticated than the last. The Unabomber did not seek money or fame. He was not claiming credit publicly. His aim was ideological, targeting individuals he believed were advancing technology in ways that threatened human freedom and the environment. Scientists, engineers, and business people became symbolic enemies in his carefully constructed worldview. His attacks were both a message and a warning, a deadly statement about the consequences of industrial progress. From a small, isolated cabin in Montana, the Unabomber operated with the patience and focus of a master craftsman. Each letter, each device, and each plan reflected not only technical skill, but a philosophy, one that would leave law enforcement baffled and the nation in fear for nearly 2 decades. The campaign escalated steadily, silently, and with devastating effect. Packages appeared in offices, mail rooms, and unsuspecting homes. Some were opened without incident. Others detonated violently, instantly transforming ordinary days into scenes of chaos and horror. By the height of the attacks, at least 9 people were killed. Their lives ended abruptly, and more than 20 were injured, some permanently disabled. Families, colleagues, and friends were left to grapple with the aftermath of sudden, inexplicable violence. Each bomb was concealed within beautifully made wooden boxes, expertly crafted to disguise their deadly contents. The craftsmanship baffled investigators, who struggled to understand how one person, working alone, could design such intricate, lethal devices. The elegance of the boxes contrasted sharply with their destructive purpose, adding a layer of psychological terror to the physical harm. The Unabomber was methodical, calculating, and virtually invisible. He left no DNA, no fingerprints, no traceable evidence of his presence. Each explosion was a demonstration of skill and patience, revealing both his technical genius and his ruthless intent. Victims could not anticipate the danger. Authorities could not predict the next target. This phase of the campaign was not just a series of isolated attacks. It was the work of a man shaping fear as carefully as he shaped his devices. He remained a ghost, a shadow, a mind that could strike anywhere, at any time, from the confines of a wooden cabin in Montana. Each explosion left a mark on the nation, a mark of terror, uncertainty, and a brilliant, lethal intellect operating beyond reach. In 1995, after years of silence, punctuated by fear and violence, the elusive attacker made a demand that stunned the nation. He insisted that a newspaper publish his essay titled "Industrial Society and Its Future in its Entirety." The text, roughly 35,000 words, was a detailed argument claiming that industrial technology had stripped humanity of its freedom, enslaving people to machines, systems, and institutions beyond their control. When both the Washington Post and the New York Times printed the manifesto in full, it became more than a political tract. It was a chilling insight into the mind behind the bombs and, unintentionally, a key piece of evidence for the authorities. Readers across the country were confronted not just with ideas, but with a psychological portrait. The meticulous logic, the obsessive attention to detail, and the intensity of thought that had guided years of violence. The language itself carried fingerprint stylistic nuances, word choices, and phrasing so distinct that someone who knew the author intimately would eventually recognize them. These linguistic patterns, embedded within arguments about technology, society, and freedom, provided a trail the FBI could not see at first, but would later prove decisive. The manifesto marked a turning point. The attacker shifted from action alone to a combination of ideology and terror, attempting to explain, justify, and elevate his crimes into a perceived higher purpose. In doing so, he revealed not just what he thought about the industrial world, but, inadvertently, who he really was. It was a calculated risk, one that would ultimately lead to his identification. Ted Kaczynski, Theodore's brother, read the manifesto with growing unease. Certain phrases, certain turns of language, mirrored letters he had received from Ted over the years. Recognition brought shock, disbelief, and an unbearable moral weight. He struggled with loyalty, family bonds, and justice, but ultimately he acted, reluctant, tormented, and painfully aware of what this would mean. David contacted the FBI, setting in motion the final chapter of a decades-long manhunt. On April April 3, 1996, federal agents quietly approached the cabin deep in the Montana wilderness near Lincoln, Montana. The structure, small and unassuming from the outside, concealed a trove of evidence that would finally unravel the mystery of the Unabomber. Inside, they found a live device hidden under the bed, ready to maim or kill. Every corner revealed meticulous preparation, bomb designs, jars of chemicals, tools, and roughly 40,000 pages of journals, many written in a complex code that would take weeks to decipher. Among these pages were drafts, notes, and reflections directly linked to the manifesto, tying ideology to action with chilling clarity. Every item inside the cabin painted a portrait of a brilliant, isolated mind, but also of a man fully capable of calculating murder. There was no doubt. Theodore John Kaczynski was taken into custody. The decades-long terror campaign, the carefully planned mailings, and the philosophical justifications all came to an abrupt, unavoidable halt. For the first time, the genius behind the bombs was face to face with the law. At trial, Kaczynski made a deliberate choice. He rejected any plea of insanity. He insisted firmly and without hesitation that his actions were not the product of mental illness, but of careful, deliberate reasoning. They were ideological. They were rational, according to his own standards. Every bombing, every mailed device, every risk taken was calculated and purposeful. Mental health experts on both sides debated fiercely. Some argued that his extreme isolation, childhood experiences, and possible effects of psychological experiments at Harvard might indicate a disturbed mind. Others insisted he was lucid, coherent, and fully aware of his actions and their consequences. Jurors and judges were presented with a detailed picture, confessions in his journals, intricate descriptions of bomb making, and philosophical writings intended to justify violence in the context of industrial society. They saw both the intellect and the menace, the reasoning and the horror. Kaczynski's insistence on accountability was unwavering. He did not want to be painted as insane or as someone incapable of understanding right from wrong. To avoid the death penalty, he made a strategic legal decision. He pled guilty. The sentence, life imprisonment without parole. Even behind bars, his words remained a window into his mind. His admissions, both in open court and in private writings, left little doubt about responsibility. There was no attempt to shift blame, no excuses beyond his ideology. The law had captured the man, but not the ideas. The debate over his sanity, his philosophy, and the motivations behind his crimes would continue long after the trial concluded. Questions continue to swirl about the role of early psychological experiments in shaping Kaczynski's later life and actions. In the 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. intelligence community funded studies into human behavior, stress, and obedience programs that were controversial, secretive, and ethically questionable. Many sought to understand how the human mind could be influenced, broken, or controlled under extreme conditions. Kaczynski participated in one such study at Harvard University, overseen by Henry Murray, a renowned psychology professor. The experiment involved personal critiques, intense stress tests, and exercises probing vulnerabilities in subjects' personalities. For some, the experience was humiliating. For others, it caused lasting emotional discomfort. Accounts described prolonged stress, public criticism, constant evaluation of reactions, elements now widely considered abusive and unethical. Scholars remain divided. Some argue the experiment may have been a catalyst aggravating pre-existing emotional sensitivities, social isolation, and distrust of authority. Others insist Kaczynski's intelligence, personal grievances, and ideological beliefs were already forming independently. There is no definitive answer. The debate continues. Did this psychological manipulation create violent tendencies or merely accelerate them in someone already troubled? What is clear is that the intersection of intelligence, trauma, and ideology played a role in the making of the Unabomber. The experiments provide context, a glimpse into early influences, but offer no simple explanation. The story of Theodore John Kaczynski is far more complex, a convergence of intellect, philosophy, and isolation, a combination that cannot be reduced to a single cause. Behind bars, Kaczynski remained a prolific writer, channeling his thoughts, philosophies, and reflections onto paper. He corresponded with admirers and critics alike, debating ideas, defending beliefs, and elaborating on the worldview that had driven his violent campaign. He published works, continued his intellectual pursuits, and engaged with the outside world, all from the confines of a prison cell. His mind, isolated physically, remained active and precise, crafting arguments and responding to inquiries with the same meticulous care that had characterized his earlier life. On June 10, 2023, at the age of 81, Theodore John Kaczynski died. Reports indicate he had been suffering from advanced illness prior to his death. His passing marked the final chapter in the life of a man whose intellect, isolation, and ideology had left an indelible mark on the United States. Yet, death did not end the influence of his words. The manifesto and the vast collection of journals continued to circulate widely. Some were cited by fringe groups seeking to justify extremist beliefs. Others were examined by students, scholars, and curious individuals interested in the social, technological, and psychological observations embedded within. His writings sparked discussion, analysis, and controversy, sometimes inspiring debate, sometimes inciting alarm. Even in death, Kaczynski's life remains a cautionary tale: the dangers of unbridled isolation, the potency of intellect wielded without empathy, and the enduring questions about how technology, society, and personal grievances can intersect to produce acts of devastating violence. What are we left with? 3 confirmed victims dead, countless more injured, families forever altered, communities terrorized, and a manifesto industrial society and its future that continues to provoke thought, fear, and debate. For some, it contains uncomfortable truths about technology, surveillance, and the erosion of autonomy. For others, it serves as a dangerous blueprint, rationalizing violence and extremist action. The story of Theodore John Kaczynski challenges us to confront difficult questions. How do we identify radicalization before it becomes violent? How can society intervene without infringing on freedom of thought? What responsibility does the media bear when giving voice to ideas capable of inciting harm? And how do we separate ideology from action, holding ideas accountable without amplifying the very danger they may carry? The legacy is complex. Kaczynski was brilliant, methodical, and terrifying, a man whose intellect became both weapon and shield. Yet, he also remains a symbol of isolation, of grievances left unaddressed, and of the potential consequences when personal ideology merges with meticulous, violent action. His life forces reflection on the intersection of intelligence, morality, and society's technological trajectory. It is a story that reminds us that genius alone does not safeguard humanity from harm, and that vigilance and empathy and understanding are as critical as justice in preventing future tragedies. In the end, the question remains: what do we do with the knowledge of a mind so brilliant and so deadly?